Welcome to the Festival of Ideas. Ollie and I are going to introduce you in this talk to a project that we've been developing for the last 2 years and hope to keep working on for several to come. It's centered in our inheritance from the pre-1642 English theatres. Between the late 1580s and the outbreak of civil war in 1642, which closed the playhouses, we have the richest inheritance of great dramatic writing for the stage of any theatrical culture in Europe. But only a tiny percentage of this reaches the stage today. Part of the fault is Shakespeare's. His canonical shadow means that all the other shrubs find it very difficult to thrive and find the open air. The result is that minor Shakespearean works that everyone confesses are flawed, get regular performances today, while masterpieces by other dramatists of much more massy substance either get very infrequent performances or languish permanently in the shadows. So our project aims to remedy that situation, or at least help it a little. We see one big snag, or at least one big hurdle to be overcome. It's neatly summarized by the theatre director Simon Usher in a quote we use often. It's from his book Directing and Zeleny. Know the difference from an actor's point of view between Shakespeare and Middleton or Webster and Marston. Each makes a different and unique demand on an actor. The scholarly output on this drama is massive, and much of it has its own validity. But search on the bookshelves, and now on your computer, for anything that gives you really detailed response to that challenge, and you'll search in vain. That specific question about what it is that a dramatist, by writing in this way, is doing to an actor, what his specific challenge is. And our reckoning is that unless we can begin to answer that in a highly specific way, the difference between Webster and Marston, between Middleton and Jonson, then we can't really begin to advocate the return of these plays to the stage in a serious and effective manner. Here, the arts of language are crucial. This is a supremely articulate theatre, and we make no apologies for that. Language is a wondrously theatrical medium, as long as you don't think of it merely as vocal, but understand that it commands and instructs the body and is itself a profoundly physical phenomenon. An actor could only manage to communicate vocally at full measure and with full range if his body is tuned and responsive. Each major pre-1642 dramatist uses the voice and language differently, makes a specific tool out of language to serve their own dramatic ends, and in the process challenges their actors' bodies and voices in idiosyncratic and innovative ways. That's our subject. Our subject is to try to map as detailed as we can what that means in terms of individual practices of individual playwrights, and the hope beyond that is to produce an advocacy for some of these masterpieces that might persuade companies to stage them. The problem here is that modern actors are really inexperienced in dramatic verse. They tend to be cautious of it, many fear it. But verse is the default medium of this drama. And as you look backwards and forwards, put a speech from a Shirley play against a Hayward, a Ford play against Chapman, you can hear immediately that the verse is working differently. We have to find out what that again means in specific dramatic contexts. There are guru books about this. The last 20, 30 years have seen a great efflorescence of books by conservatoire trainers, theatre directors, how to. They're mainly concerned with Shakespeare, but there's a kind of rhetorical gesture in lots of them. If you've got Shakespeare under your belt by these methods, you'll be able to do the other dramatists as well. You can hear from my tone that we're skeptical about this. They tend to reassure fear by saying, here's 3 easy steps. Here's 4 easy lessons. If you learn these, you've got it. Almost all of these are ahistorical. They always simplify because the practice of the verse is infinitely diverse. To give you one example, without naming the guru in case. There's one who says that an iambic pentameter line is 5 feet, 5 stresses, dum, 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 dum. He says that always the first of those stresses and the last of those stresses takes a heavier accent than the others. And the middle of the line is almost invariably of less significance at the beginning and end. This is ahistorical balderdash. It's ignoring the evidence of the verse. And it's also perfect soporific, because if you phrase every line in the same way, you're going to have a very sleepy audience, which is the exact opposite of what this verse can do when you actually release it fully energetically on the stage. This kind of method blunts actors' perceptions. It takes attention away from the idiosyncrasy, the valuable idiosyncrasy of particular actors' practice. And so what we have tried to do is to develop our own rehearsal methods based upon some basic historical presuppositions. And Ollie is now going to talk to you about those.
16th century education was deeply obsessed with teaching the art of language. The humanist revolution in the grammar school curriculum made this its first priority, born out of the work of visitors to England such as Erasmus and Juan Luis Vives, and supported by both Catholic and Protestant scholars and courtiers on either side of the Reformation. It was believed that an education deeply rooted in the study of the classics, of grammar, rhetoric, poetry, history, and moral philosophy would provide the crown with a pool of councillors and officials and a nation of civilized, obedient subjects, something which the precariously placed Tudors and their supporters could not afford to ignore. These ideas had gestated for some time in the elite schools such as Eton and Winchester, but across the mid-16th century, this new educational agenda was reaching out into the provinces, prompting a wave of newly founded or refounded schools to adopt humanist pedagogy, and supported by local landed gentry and wealthy urban civilians who wanted to offer their, at least male, children an education which would open opportunity for advancement in society or in a profession. As an example, the kind of take-up in Newcastle in the late 1570s, it's been calculated around a quarter of the boys in the city between 10 and 15 attended the new grammar school set up under Henry VIII. Indeed, the take-up of this education was such that increasingly opportunities were outweighed by the number of suitably skilled candidates in the late 16th century, resulting in a glut of what Neil Rhodes has termed the unemployably eloquent. At the centre of this system was a preoccupation with language as an indispensable tool of social interaction, the gift it bestowed on those who mastered it to persuade and mould others to their desired ends, and ultimately to play a role in the government of a nation. Accordingly, its emphasis was on language as speech, not written text, and on the full complexity and potency of its communicative powers via, for instance, vocal nuancing, vivid phrasing, and the resourcefulness of apt and eloquent gesture. In other words, it is clear and effective speech, moving and affective speech, and its bodily associations that constitutes the materials of study in this system. And it equips its students with a finessed grasp of rhetoric, which is lively and creative. Much of the humanist curriculum focused on text in Latin, including those by Erasmus, Athonius, Terence, Virgil, Cicero, Quintilian, Ovid, Horace, and Caesar, but the skills learned through their study were expected to be implied in English. Both Roger Ascham, Elizabeth I's tutor, and Richard Mulcaster, the master at Merchant Taylor's School in London, extol the virtues of cross-pollination between Latin and English in this study. Common to all aspects of the system was the mode of delivery. Renaissance schools awarded merit almost exclusively in terms of rhetorical performance, and the school day was shaped and punctuated by up to 7 oral performances, including prayers with due tact and pausing, the 10 Commandments, rules for rhetoric and grammar to recite a part of speech and of a verb in its turn, a passage of poetry, a translation of their own, a piece of classical oratory, a speech from a play, excerpts of a sermon, a dialogue, and, for higher forms, themes and declamations. In the various surviving texts serving as instructions for both teachers and students, we found exhortations which exhibit clear implications for the performance of drama. Cardinal Wolsey, in his instructions to teachers at an Ipswich grammar school, noted, "Lastly, you are carefully to mark out to your pupils every striking elegancy of style, every antiquated expression, everything that is new, every Greekicized expression, everything that is obscure, every etymology, derivation, or composition that may arise, whatever is harsh or confused in the arrangement of the sentence. You are to mark every orthography, every figure, every graceful ornament of style, every rhetorical flourish, whatever is proverbial, all passages that ought to be imitated, and all that ought not." The first generations of schoolboys relentlessly trained in this kind of curriculum emerged into the world just as the nascent theatre industry, powered by the burgeoning prosperity of a capital city in the later 16th century, hit its stride in the late 1580s and early 1590s. The result was that linguistic skills honed in the schoolroom for quite different purposes brilliantly equipped some key writers with what they needed to create a dramatic revolution, taking full advantage of the resources that the newly established permanent playhouses placed at their disposal. They had been taught to analyze how a thought could be expressed in multiple ways, and the rhetorical and forensic implications of choosing between those multiple options in order to serve the purpose they currently had in hand. They had learned how a thought might be repeated and varied purposefully, so as to embed its implications in the hearers' minds and to convince them cumulatively of its justice. They had been instructed in how to fit a communication to a specific audience and how to inflect it with emotion apt to the occasion and context. They had learnt too how language and voice are physical and bodily expressive. They had been made alert to the ways in which a speech might respond to, be provoked by, and indeed be made seem to grow seamlessly out of its predecessor with maximum effectiveness. They'd also been guided how to spring surprises, sudden impressive swerves of direction in argument, heart-stopping moments where emotion suddenly flooded an utterance, and so on. Finally, they have been taught by a host of local techniques to underpin these larger goals and aims by the fine calibration of verbal detail and grammatical organization. Their instructors had not intended it and probably would not in many cases have approved what came with their instruction, but this education had in effect equipped some of its most remarkable pupils with the basic toolkit to invent new forms of drama now that opportunity had been presented to them. And this was a revolution which kept morphing in unexpected ways, as new generations of writers were tempted to try their hand at playwriting across a half century of radical experiment until the closure of the playhouses in 1642. In the process, dramatic verse also keeps mutating. The stylistic divergencies between the plays of Thomas Kyd in circa 1590 and those in, say, James Shirley in the 1960s are enormous, and in almost every way they place distinct demands upon their performers. Those differences provide the key focus for our investigations with Shakespeare's rivals. We began our work on the project in the summer of 2019. Our first public showing was a pair of performances in the Department of Theatre, Film, Television and Interactive Media that October, when we juxtaposed sequences from three brilliant, radically dissimilar plays from the 1610s and 1620s. The Devil's Law Case by John Webster, The Witch of Edmonton by John Ford, Thomas Dekker and William Rowley, and The Roman Actor by Philip Massinger, and asked questions of the distinct ways in which their authors wrote for performers. For summer 2020, we have planned a much more ambitious set of performances and an aligned conference, bringing together theatre directors, actors, and academics to take these explorations further via practical experiment, but the pandemic put paid to these plans. Necessity being the mother invention, we regrouped and decided to use Zoom to begin an exploration of the emphatically different ways in which playwrights deploy soliloquy. For this, we rehearsed and filmed with some of our current third-year theatre undergraduates and with a number of alumni who have now become professional actors. So we have now experimented with speeches by more than a dozen playwrights, from Marlowe to Middleton, Chapman to Hayward, and we'll soon begin to release these on our project website Shakespeare's Rivals.com, where you can now watch the film of a 2019 performance and an initial selection of solos from Thomas Middleton. The contrast between 1590 and 1630 is as marked as we expected, but we have often discovered almost equally emphatic differences between the demands placed on actors by playwrights working nearly simultaneously. For instance, between Ben Jonson in Sejanus and George Chapman in Bussy d'Amboise in the early years of James I's reign. The process keeps generating new questions, but has also enhanced our admiration for the restless creativity and inventiveness of these writers. And while continuing this work, our next phase of the research involves working closely with industry professionals, including major directors and actors, as we aim to develop a greater confidence and ambition in national organizations to tackle this repertory, which deserves a much greater presence on the modern stage. I'll now hand you back to Mike to give us a closer look at the type of work which we have been conducting over the last year.
So our project aims to combine textual analysis and rehearsal exploration, the two interweaving, not conceived as separate entities. Both pursue the specifics of each dramatist's use of verse and the nature of the conversation with the actors that use of verse encodes. How a conversation is being pursued that will in each case create distinctive dramatic events. Our assumption is that the writing in the best of these texts is underpinned by the most careful craftsmanship, and that craftsmanship provides an indispensable substructure or foundation for the actors to build on, which presupposes that they've got to be alert to both its minutiae and its larger design. It's what they're being invited to work with and through. Rehearsal in this theatre was almost infinitesimal in comparison to what modern theatres assume. There has to be direct communication from the words upon the page to the actors for innovation to be able to be translated into successful performance action. So the more clearly the writer has articulated the individuality of the way he's working with his verse, and the more easily and accessibly that can be decoded by the actors, the better. Then and now. We want to say very clearly that we don't believe the results of this will be, as it were, a regimented or a correct response. What we're talking about is basic data, and then the actor works with it. There's a great space here for the imaginative creativity of the actor. And one of the things we've done with some of the scenes is to produce different versions of the same speech, working exactly in the same way in the early stages, with actors who are radically different in what they bring to it. So that, for example, we'll soon have we've recorded one and two more are quite close to being recorded, three versions of a brilliant opening aria, as it were, in Ben Jonson's The Devil is an Ass, for a man who urgently wishes to meet the devil and doesn't know he's about to do that. It's a wonderfully baroque piece of writing with extraordinary changes of rhythm, but we've given it to three actors who are listening very hard to the speech, following it very, very closely, and producing three different people out of it. So it's not doctrinaire in the sense of confining the actor, it liberates them. And the key demands we set are the closest attention to local detail, the exact nuancing of a word, the positioning of a phrase, but also always simultaneously to the forward impetus, the larger design of each speech, what its goals might be, how it's organized. Does it press forwards? Does it repeat? Does it encircle itself? Does it move forward? The foibles of modern performance that we would most want to resist is a tendency for actors to indulge detail and lose larger design, or on the other hand, to be so obsessed by the amount of text they're being asked to shift in comparison to a modern naturalistic script that they sacrifice everything to impetus and lose fine detail. Finding the right balance between those two things is a phenomenally challenging proposition for an actor, and we don't underrate that for a second. It requires massive athletic, literal physical skill, technical craft, and intellectual and emotional alertness and openness. The these are Himalayan peaks of theatre. But if an actor can bring that to them, then they are like nothing else in terms of the kind of experience they can offer to an audience. Listen to the text carefully, build upon it vibrantly, and before you will be an active, living human presence incarnated in front of you. Okay. We want, as Ollie said, we've been exploring more than a dozen playwrights' work, with some playwrights 3 or 4 plays. These will appear soon on the website. Within this talk, we're unique and illustrated by one instance. But what we wanted to do was to show you both a finished result, but also rehearsal process, because the devil is in the detail, the tugging at the script, thinking about shapes and why they are as they are, that happens moment by moment in the rehearsal process. The example we've chosen is actually from the earliest play we worked on, a masterpiece of the early 1620s, Thomas Middleton's Women Beware Women. And we've worked on 5 different soliloquies from it with 5 different actors. The one we're going to illustrate from is for Isabella, and it's from Act 1, Scene 2 of the play. Isabella is an enormously rich heiress, completely dominated by a tyrannical father who is determined to decree whom she will marry. The person he has set his sights on, greedily, is another rich heir. The disadvantage is that the guy is a congenital idiot. I mean, an appalling prospect for the young woman, but the father assumes that his will rules. The scene we're dealing with is the first time that Isabella has been introduced to this terrifying prospect of a husband. In the first 161 lines of that scene, her marriage is the subject. In those 161 lines, she says 2 words. At one point, she protests, "Good father," and the father overrides her. "Tell me not of tongues and rumors," and goes on asserting his will. So the moment we're going to deal with is the moment when Isabella finally turns to the audience in soliloquy and communicates to us her current feelings, the sensation of being in the eye of this terrible storm. We know nothing about her effectively, except what we will have judged from the eloquence of her muteness until this point. So she seizes our attention and takes it. I'm simply going to read it to you so you have a sense of its larger design. I'm going to do it relatively uninflectively, just so that you have a sense of its shape. And then we're going to show you 2 sequences of us in rehearsal with it. Marry a fool. Can there be greater misery to a woman that means to keep her days true to her husband and know no other man? So virtue wills it. Why, how can I obey and honor him, but I must needs commit idolatry? A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made neither. Oh, the heartbreakings of miserable maids where love is enforced. The best condition is but bad enough. When women have their choices, commonly they do but buy their thraldoms and bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection. As if a fearful prisoner should bribe the keeper to be good to him, yet lies in still, and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes. By Our Lady, no misery surmounts a woman. Men by their slaves, but women by their masters. Yet honesty and love makes all this happy, and next to angels, the most blessed estate. That providence that has made every poison good for some use and set 4 warring elements at peace in man, can make a harmony in things that are most strange to human reason. Oh, but this marriage? Okay. So it's a long breathe, it's complex patterning, it both moves forward and circles back upon itself. She constantly recalls early things and then remodels them in the way that Ollie has mentioned the education system taught them to do, to take an idea, repeat it but enhance it, revisit it but change it. For someone, a dramatist wanting to portray a person trapped but intelligent, the armory has been given to him. Okay, we're going to come into the actress involved is called Lauren Mopes. She was an undergraduate on the theatre degree in our department a few years ago. She played the leads in 2 of the female leads in productions that I directed of Masterton's The Dutch Courtesan and Vanbragh's The Provoked Wife. Both of these are available to you on an earlier website that Ollie created called Early Modern Theatre And if you want to see, you'll see her at that stage in her career. She was already pretty fine. The sequence we're going to show you is from a very early, the two sequences are from a very early rehearsal. The rehearsal itself lasted for over an hour. So don't feel fearful. We're only going to show you short excerpts. We are working with a fine-tuning of detail. We're also constantly asking the question of how does this grow out of that? So here's the first of our rehearsal moments.
Marry a fool. Can there be greater misery to a woman that means to keep her days true to her husband and know no other man? So virtue wills it. Why, how can I obey and honour him, but I must needs commit idolatry? A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made neither. Oh.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So virtue wills it is potentially a hinge between what goes before and what comes after. Because if you paraphrase it, you know, I mean, I want to be loyal. That's what I've been taught by virtue.
Yeah.
But how can it possibly be virtuous? Yeah.
Yeah. Got you. Yeah.
But so it swings you through.
No other man. So virtue, the stress of that. So virtue wills.
Yeah. Paraphrase it and stretch it out a little bit. That is what virtue commands me to do.
But
so virtue wills it. It's that kind of rhythm.
Yeah.
So.
And no other man. So
don't rush into it. Give yourself just a little. Yeah.
Be greater misery to a woman that means to keep her days true to her husband and know no other man. So virtue wills it. Why, how can I obey and honour him, but I must needs commit idolatry?
Yeah.
A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made neither.
So then think perhaps of that last bit as having said, but I must needs commit idolatry. Let me explain that to you.
Yeah, what I mean is.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm a little bit ahead of you, listener. Let me help you catch up.
Yeah. Can there be greater misery to a woman that means to keep her days true to her husband and know no other man? So virtue wills it. Why, how can I obey and honour him, but I must needs commit idolatry? A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made neither. Okay,
that's coming on lovely. Obey and honour is a quote, isn't it?
Yeah.
So how can I obey? That's what virtue teaches me. How can I obey and honour him? But I must need, absolutely, it's a consequence. So the next line can be slightly different in tone.
Yeah.
Well, how can I obey and honour him? But I must needs commit. I was warned against idolatry too.
Yeah.
Also, I mean, isn't honour and obey in the wedding?
In the marriage.
Yeah, the marriage vows, and then the idolatry is the Ten Commandments. So it's a sort of the conflict. Religion's being conflicted here.
Yeah.
As well.
Cool.
On meter, my instinct is if you can make it work with even meter, then that probably is what to do. So and that but ill made. You see what I mean?
Yeah.
You're doing and that but ill.
That but ill made.
If you put the weight on but, you slightly take the focus off ill made neither, which is where the real a fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made neither.
And that but ill made neither.
So both of them have got slightly light starts because the important bit is image of a man, ill made neither.
Fool, yes, okay. A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made neither.
Yeah, I think that sounds right. Yes.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
No other man, so virtue wills it.
And
How can I? How? Sorry, just working through.
no, go on. That's fine. Great.
And no other man, so virtue wills it. Why, how can I obey and honour him, but I must needs commit idolatry? A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill made. And that but ill made neither.
Well, it's also, isn't it, that sentence could stop at the end of that line. So she throws in another little bomb. Because in terms of her idolatry thing, the point is made by saying a fool is but the image of a man.
Yeah.
And bloody hell, this one was badly made. I mean, that's an extra insult added in.
Yeah, yeah. But yeah, I guess that's specific to him rather than just a fool. This one.
Yeah. He's a fool of fools.
It couldn't be worse, really.
There was a whole assembly line of fools, and the one that sort of got badly made, even by the fool's standard. Yeah. I mean, it's a kind of victory. She, all the time she's saying, I'm so much brighter than him.
Yes.
Which will, in the end, of course, make her very cocky. She thinks she can run him.
Mm-hmm.
But at the moment, it's just entrapment. Our second excerpt from rehearsals came 10, 15 minutes after that one. We have progressed a few lines further down the speech. This time you'll hear some of the same issues recurring because you can't get away from them and the basic currency with which we work. But we also begin to identify something in this speech which is quite distinctive, we reckon. Effectively, the presence of two voices, which are yet clearly logically part of one person's consciousness. It was an idea that once we began to develop it, the actress responded to very warmly. And I think you'll agree that when you see the final performance she generated, she built on this clue very strongly once she had real personal command of the speech. So here's our second excerpt. My instinct would be that, for example, in line 172, by matters less than thraldom. You see what I mean? She is bringing up for the first time the fact that, not the first time in the play, but the first time that she's spoken about it, that marriage is a critical financial transaction where resources are moved from the female side to the male side of the new relationship. Yeah.
Yeah.
So it is a new idea, but the key thing is what you buy. You buy the imposition of a tyranny over you. So when women have their choices, commonly they do but buy their thraldoms.
Right. Yeah.
And bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that sets up the prisoner.
Yeah. This doesn't make, like, why does this happen? This doesn't make sense, kind of in a way.
Yeah.
And then she uses an example to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
As if a fearful prisoner should bribe the keeper to be good to him, yet lies in still and glad of. I think you might almost, I don't know, but you might almost lose that comma. And lies in still, is still in prison, aching for even a good look. Glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes.
Yeah.
My God. And again, you see, that's almost a satiricide, right? You could take that little bit and put it into the voice of someone talking about marriage from outside.
Yeah. And
then back, just like Oh, the Heartbreakings, by a lady, no misery surmounts a woman's. She bring, it's almost as if there is a bit of her brain that is so sharp, so forensic, that she manages for a sentence at a time to absent herself from being in the eye of the storm.
Yeah.
And then being back in. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's helpful because otherwise it's marrying the scenario that she's in and the way that she's thinking.
Yeah.
And trying to,
I mean, it builds to the surprise that's coming, that when Livia says to him, but he's not your uncle, she's into planning mode in a second.
Mm.
This is a very bright lady. I mean, she's morally appalling. She can't join up any of this. But give her a problem to solve and she's off in a way that none of the males in that family, including the uncle she adores, can begin to get near. I mean, he's just saying, oh dear, what do we do? Well, we do this, don't we? I marry her. And then, you know,
Yeah.
So she's not a weeper.
Yeah.
Though she's in a panic and a deep depression.
Mm-hmm. Cool. The best condition is but bad enough. When women have their choices, commonly they do but buy their thraldoms and bring great portions to men to keep them in such a long sentence.
Well, at the very moment, for the moment, break it. To me, the sense breaks would be, or the sense portions, as it were, would be commonly they do but buy their thraldoms and bring great portions to men to do what? To imprison them further. So you need something there, don't you? You either need a little beat or you need a tonal change, and bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection.
Yeah.
Is the way to do it with, well, one way to do it without pausing. But simply pause would do it, and bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection. As if a fearful prisoner should bribe the keeper to be good to him, yet lies in still and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes. I think that's where the stress falls, isn't it? Because he bribes the keeper to be always good to him. And what does he get out of it? Just an occasional friendly glance sometimes.
Yeah. Not
a permanent change in condition, but, you know, a little pat on the head. We're not going to torture you today. It's awful, isn't it? It's terrifying.
Yeah. The best condition is but bad enough. When women have their choices, commonly they do but buy their thraldoms and bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection, as if a fearful prisoner should bribe the keeper to be good to him, yet lies in still and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes.
So I think that's really going well. I would lose that full stop, that comma after still, because the point isn't that they're still in prison. They're always going to be in prison. It was that being in prison onwards, their conditions haven't been changed. Yet lies in still and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes.
Lies in still and they're glad, yeah.
It comes out as a breathing test, doesn't it?
Yeah. When women have their choices, commonly they do but buy their thraldoms and bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection, as if a fearful prisoner should bribe the keeper to be good to him, yet lies in still and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes. By a lady, no misery surmounts a woman.
The sometimes qualifies both the good usage and the good look. Do you see what I mean?
I'm glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes.
You don't need I think for the sense, you don't need that pause before sometimes. Yet lies in still and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes.
Got you, yeah.
Yeah. One of the most exciting moments in rehearsing a full production is the moment when the actors begin to take personal possession of the script and begin to produce results from it none of us could have predicted at an earlier stage in the rehearsals. That's one of the reasons why in our productions we insist that everyone is off book at least 3 weeks before the opening night, because that space is when the really interesting things occur. The training, the getting to know the lay of the land, as it were, has been done, and now people begin to be free. I hope you'll agree that in the version that we're about to show you, which was recorded some weeks after the rehearsals you've been watching, Lauren has got possession of the speech, personal possession of it. If you're interested in watching the other soliloquies we've recorded, those are available on the site that Ollie has named. But we're going to conclude this talk with Lauren as Isabella.
Mary,
a fool. Can there be greater misery to a woman that means to keep her days true to her husband and know no other man? So virtue wills it. Why, how can I obey and honour him, but I must needs commit idolatry? A fool is but the image of a man, and that but ill-made neither. Oh, the heartbreakings of miserable maids where love's enforced. The best condition is but bad enough. When women have their choices, commonly they do but buy their thraldoms and bring great portions to men to keep them in subjection. As if a fearful prisoner should bribe the keeper to be good to him, yet lies in still and glad of a good usage, a good look sometimes. By Our Lady, no misery surmounts a woman's. Men buy their slaves, but women buy their masters. Yet honesty and love makes all this happy. And next to angels, the most blessed estate. That providence that has made every poison good for some use and sets four warring elements at peace in man, can make a harmony in things that are most strange to human reason. Oh, but this marriage...
Good evening. Thank you for staying with us. It's really strange listening to your own speech and seeing what the automatic translation does to it. I have a colleague in the department who may be indeed be watching at this moment, who works with actors and robots, and we had the Roman actor translated into the robot actor. So I hope she was pleased by that. If you have any questions, we're here to answer and respond. There's a chat function that you can use at the bottom of the screen. Sorry, a Q&A function. If there's anything, we are very willing. It's not a political requirement of the occasion that there should be, but we'll just pause in case there are any. So far, so the question is, have we come across any plays, and Sir Janus was instanced, it's ones that just don't translate to the stage. We actually reckon that Sir Janus does, and there was a successful production of it by the Royal Shakespeare Company, what, 15 years ago? Its problem is its length. He almost certainly rewrote it for print and over-elaborated it. But we do have a recording of a great soliloquy from it, which will be appearing on the website. And again, actually, in a piece of cross-gender casting, it's performed by Lauren. It's of the political henchman, Macro, on his way up to supreme power in Rome, a kind of Eichmann figure, finding his opportunity. And he turns to the audience and explains exactly what his principles are, or lack of principles. Our experiment there is that we believe that Jonson's own punctuation, which is very elaborate and which he enforced in the printing house, is actually a guide to performance. This is, in scholarly terms, not a traditional view at all. The tendency is to assume he was slightly in his dotage in doing it. So we do observe the punctuation. So we encourage you, it will appear soon on the website. So I hope you would like that. On the other side of it, we've actually deliberately done plays that well, I'll give you an example. George Chapman's Pussy d'Amboise, which was an enormous hit in the Jacobean theatre, is a play I've never understood. I can't hear its rhythms. And we've actually performed a sequence from it in a way that begins to make me feel I'm wrong on that. So the reverse journey's been made. I don't know if Ollie's got anything you'd like to add?
Oh, I've lost it. No, I don't.
We've got other questions coming up.
Yeah, questions coming up. Yeah, so yeah, probably not on that question straight away. Great. Shall I turn to Stephen Harlow? Thanks for your question. Asking, do we edit heavily when preparing for a production? And the answer to that is, well, heavily no. And it slightly depends on the context. So in the productions that have been staged in department over the last number of years, the the general rule of thumb that's been taken is to not make many or any changes which are unnecessary. And it's really when there is a key moment where the meaning of a word has shifted, often where it no longer holds currency for a modern audience, we will sometimes consider switching for a word which still carries the equivalent meaning both then and now, if that is important for the sense of what is being said at the moment and what of that action, to communicate the action on the stage to a modern audience. So that actually happens very rarely. For this particular project, though, we set out on the basis because we're trying to really understand how the different playwrights write verse and use it to create the different characters, and to distinguish between them. We took a decision very early on that we wouldn't make any intervention in terms of vocabulary. Where there is a sort of slight difference, and this is something which hasn't had a huge amount of sort of discussion in sort of research up till now, it is looking across modern modern translation, modern transcriptions, and their use of punctuation. Editors tend to punctuate speeches according to modern rules of speech and grammar, and that doesn't always help the sense for an actor. And it varies from playwright to playwright. Someone like Jonson, who meticulously oversaw the editing and the printing of his work, who used punctuation pretty heavily, but does so in a way that we've sort of found really helps an actor take their way through the speech. So we have sort of experimented with and noted the differences perhaps between modern and original punctuation and how we might interpret that. Mike, I don't know if, as the editor, you want to say more?
No, absolutely, that's fine. I was going to go on to another. We've had some questions about rehearsing on Zoom. We deliberately chose to work with soliloquy. We had other plans before the pandemic hit, which would all have been about moving to bigger ensemble scenes. And the performance we planned for June was actually going to do a series of really massive scenes from City Comedy. We were rather depressed about the thought of all that being snuffed out. And for a while, we thought we'd lost the project. And then it occurred to us that we could actually use this medium to deal with soliloquy for the moment and explore the diversity of practice in that. And we found it an extremely congenial medium. I mean, clearly, if we were directing these speeches on stage, other logics would come in. But we were able to really find home vocal expressiveness and actually also focus bodies in this medium. Wouldn't want to stay on it forever. We have hopes that we're moving out of it in July. We have the money, thanks to the university, to stage a one-day event in which we're going to explore some ensemble scenes with 2 leading professional directors coming in to work with us. So hopefully our Zoom days are behind us, but it's been far more stimulating and has allowed us to do something forensic that we might not have done at this stage if we'd not been forced to. And we've had the advantage that 5 really, really good now young professionals were available in a way that normally they wouldn't be. They are actually overjoyed to do this work with us because it was keeping their skills in play. A related question was about athleticism in this medium. I mean, clearly the full athleticism of sustaining a soliloquy in front of 400 or 3,000 people, no, not in this medium. But the bodily control that's required to do what Lauren does in that final version of the soliloquy is still pretty honed. So some of those skills are there, but yeah, it'll be great to take. We haven't talked about this, but we might. I'm proposing this to Ollie now. We might take some of these speeches back in front of an audience deliberately to test how different that recalibrates it for us, and if possible with some of the same actors, but that might not be possible. Are there ones you'd like to? I'll go back in and look at what's there. Ollie, have you seen something?
Oh, hang on. Sorry. So we've got a question from Joe. Hi, Joe. Nice to see you again. Who was our DSM for the original production of Shakespeare's Rivals, coming back, asking what was the most surprising discovery that we've made through this project that you think you wouldn't have otherwise. I'm really thinking I'm not sure what the most surprising discovery is. I think we found I think we were surprised in finding various speeches from playwrights who are almost never performed. Chapman, I think, was particularly one. And Messenger as well, whose verse has never seemed particularly exciting compared to some of his contemporaries, or attractive for one performance. But in working on the speeches to see the differences, finding new things about those speeches and the way that they are constructed, which does make for compelling performance. And it's not something simply that's brought to it by the actor. Obviously, that is important, but there is sort of some really interesting material there. Whether or not that is enough to say, let's now go and stage a whole load of Chapman and Messenger, might be something we might have other candidates we'd rather tackle first. But certainly, to sort of see particularly some of those overshadowed playwrights and the potential for performance now exists, that I think has been really interesting and exciting.
I mean, just to add to that, we've done a soliloquy from a Messenger play called The Great Duke of Florence, which no one is going to stage today. It has serious problems, but the soliloquies really attracted us, and the sheer level of technical craft in it really excited us as we went. There's a kind of certain level below which a playwright of that kind in the period doesn't sink. And at his best, as in Roman Actor, which we did in the show you worked with us on, he goes far, far above it. But there's just a substratum of absolute reliability there that is extraordinary. We're now exploring Fletcher, who in the 17th century, if you ask someone at the end of the 17th century who the three great playwrights of the 17th century were, they would almost certainly have said Shakespeare, Jonson, Fletcher. Fletcher's disappeared more or less, both critically and scholarly, as well as from performance. And we've done a couple of his speeches, and I'm finding them a joy, from a play called The Scornful Lady. And we've got 3 versions now of one wonderful soliloquy for a woman, which we'll put up on the site in due course. And it's a voice unlike any of the others. There was also a question from Ian about, I wasn't quite clear what the direction of it was, but, Ian, about advice for working on this kind of material with younger students, teenagers. We should perhaps say where we would like to be going. I did my little sneer in the talk about the kind of gurus who come up with 3 easy rules, and this is all you have to do. What we would like to suggest in time, we hope to put in place is something like 6 or 7 questions you ought to ask as a performer or as someone reading a text thinking about performance of a text. We want to come up with principles which will enable curiosity, but also give confidence, because they're quite precise, but leave you potentially alerts to difference. So these questions would actually help you to see, the minute you're reading a Jonson script, that you're dealing with territory completely different from Webster. So our ideal would be to have that finally in a form that could be used at a practical level in training, whether it be in a school or in the conservatoire. And we're being joined in the one-day conference in July by the head of the MA of Classical Acting at Central, precisely for that kind of reason. We want a dialogue of that kind. And we also have a link with various schools. Not to the same degree that we've yet got the central one, but we will develop this through to kind of road test some of the propositions. We're just getting to the stage where we can pull far enough back to see what some of those might be. But our hope would be that that would be a better route than simply saying do this, because the minute you say do this, you deaden it. I really resent the RSC toolkit for schools, because it's full of I mean, it pretends to be enabling, but then it tells you this is actually what we do. Ends of lines matter, all that kind of stuff, which won't sustain serious scrutiny. So we'd like to come up with principles that help you to think and find out, rather than rules from on high.
So I think maybe one final question from Laura, asking about this sort of challenge of finding good roles for women in the early modern canon. And I think that's something those of us working in this period and all of us can certainly recognise. Yeah, I mean, the short answer to your question is which you ask is, do we find any particular strong early modern roles for women outside of Shakespeare, or have we used gender blind or cross-gender casting to combat? And the answer is both. There are some fantastic female characters and speeches from across a multitude of playwrights, from Middleton to Jonson to Beaumont and Fletcher, whose works we've sort of investigated. We've often found one of the challenges has been, because we confined ourselves for the most part to soliloquy in this phase of the project, there are other female characters who are really interesting and really exciting to tackle, but don't necessarily have a moment where they have a good soliloquy for us to work on. So that has been a factor. But then we have also, in various cases, with our female actors, given them pieces which are for male characters. For example, Mike mentioned Macro as one, and that has worked, I think, very, very well. We haven't necessarily been thinking through the consequences of of that casting for the wider play necessarily. That hasn't necessarily been at the top of our priorities to think about. But certainly, I think it's a fairly regular, it's a standard practice now to have some sort of gender blind or cross-gender casting, but to make those roles accessible to anyone who might be best equipped to take those on.
And we have slightly blurred our principle more recently, in that we haven't only been working on soliloquy. We've begun to work on extended speeches, and that's allowed us to cast our net a little bit wider in terms of strong women. One that we have in rehearsal at the moment, in fact, it's just been recorded. We haven't yet had a chance to properly look at the recording, is a wonderful speech towards the end of Jonson's Devils and Ass for Mistress Fitzdottrell, where she manages to so address a man who wants to seduce her that by the end she's left it with him with no option but to help her legally, with absolutely no sexual payback. And it's done with such wonderful sophistication. And the actresses, it's 3 actresses working on it separately. I mean, they've just been having enormous fun with it. The one we did in Bussy d'Amboise was a Tamara soliloquy, the one from Act 2, which is sensationally difficult on the page, but it slowly began to work for us. So there's all kinds of voices there. And from The Scornful Lady, it's the soliloquy by the title character in Act 5. Again, we've got multiple versions of that, and it's beautifully structured. But you can actually make it. One of the versions is very self-aware. The character thinks she's funny. I mean, looks at herself and thinks, "Why am I doing this?" The other is someone actually in the eye of the storm and thinking, "My God, why am I doing this?" And so on. You can vary it, but they're all strong positions. So just fun. Okay. Thank you very much for the questions, and thank you also for sticking it out. Okay. Please watch the website. More and more will be added across the summer and then into the winter. Okay. Thank you again. Good night.
Thank you. Bye.